in.
Live now.
Great. All right. Let me go to our coding agenda. Let's see. So for me, the thing I want to talk a little bit about is the Weaver backend and how to handle some of the changes that I'm thinking of there in a way that's not too disruptive. Looks like we don't have an agenda for today yet. So let me add that. Any other items people want to add?
Don't think so.
Michelle, anything from you?
I can't think of anything right now. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't want to take an hour and a half to talk about the Mako refactor I'm thinking about, but we can probably broaden the scope a little bit so it's not too mind-numbing for everybody. All right. Let me just pull up the GitHub page, the Weaver.
I think one in the past was like triaging issues on various repositories.
Yeah, last week we spent most of the time trying to go through and reinvigorate, I think, some toolbox issues.
Right, so I wasn't here.
Yeah.
All right.
But
should we continue that for this week?
We could, yeah. I think some of the things definitely might go a bit faster since a lot of them are issues that you made and you might remember a bit more about. Like we spent a decent amount of time trying to understand what they were and recreate them and see if they were still valid. Whereas you might know off the top of your head, oh yeah, I did that. Close. So.
Very kind way to say I just didn't give descriptive issue labels. So thank you. All right, so I added a couple labels. So one is I have this big goal of trying to make the Weaver easier to use. And I tried to, we made some Trello boards. Michelle, you had some really nice comments on some of them as well. Just so you, that was meant to just be like a rough outline of the flow more than specific labels and stuff.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how specific it was getting, so I figured I might as well make comments.
Probably a mix of some of them in there too. But yeah, no, it's great to look at when we're doing it. My goal is to kind of do those in turn. So the first thing is, I know Bryce, you reviewed the PR, so you're familiar with it, but Michelle, I don't know if you'd seen the new front page of the Weaver.
Well, I've seen that image a few times with the cards.
Yeah. So now it is.
I love it. It's awesome.
Front page. And some of these things are kind of placeholders. Upload a form and build from scratch, do different things. Does this work? Yeah, this works too, though it's not descriptive. Think about how to make it descriptive, I guess. It's actually a pretty easy thing to do. Hooks are already in place for that. Okay, and then this should be integrated in the future, I think, but right now it just takes you to the Form Explorer. But there's no reason we can't integrate the library of forms from the Form Explorer in a more seamless way with the Weaver. Okay, so that's the first screen that changed. And then there's a whole bunch of other changes that are listed in Trello. It was like, okay, let's think backwards. Okay, before we make big changes to the front end, can we make the back end in better shape? I was like, oh, well, we should clean up some of the code. Let me go to that label, refactor. That was one of our tasks is in there. It's like move some of the code to modules to make it easier to read. And I think that's a good task. But then I was like, oh, before we do that, we can get rid of a lot of code by this other idea we had of making the whole file generated by it. a Mako template, rather than what we have right now, which is kind of in between the two, right? Like we have the small Mako templates, which are given kind of arbitrary key names in a YAML file. And then we have code blocks in the Weaver interview YAML, which control what order they're inserted in. It's mostly one-to-one. So it just is like, it's kind of just a layer of abstraction, which I don't know has a really high payoff to have that like combination of things. Sometimes there's inconsistencies in the variable names when they go from the interview YAML to the Mako in the source file YAML. And it's like, well, also, it's not as flexible as it could be, because the only way to control the order of those blocks and what blocks we have is by editing the interview, the Weaver interview itself. You can't change just the output file. You have to change a bunch of other places at once to get the customization you want. So I was like, all right, thinking backwards from, I want to change the UI. I want to have cleaner code before I change the UI. Oh, before we do cleaner code, there's this big refactor we've been putting off for a while. So I started working on it, and I think it's the right choice. So, yeah, maybe people have thoughts there. I can show you what I've been working on, I guess. It may be a little hard to see, but it seems to be mostly working, which is actually, that was pretty good. I just spent like an hour or two on it so far. I just went through, copied over the Mako from the output patterns.yaml file into a new template file, which is, and then I was like, okay, well, what's left to do there? I think the big thing is we had some functions which controlled display of YAML blocks, which I'd like to move into Mako templates too. And I came up with a list of, I think, about 4 or 5 of those. I haven't copied this repository to my local computer yet, so let's do that. So I do kind of feel bad about working on something that end users will almost not get to see at all.
I think it's a great idea. I think strengthening and making code more maintainable is a really important part of development.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm generally am for like let's do some let's do some refactors before we start trying to change everything about how things work.
Okay.
I will admit I'm not. I remember when like the Mako templates were introduced in DocAssemble, and I remember not sort of really understanding how exactly they worked. I get the general idea, but I just wasn't sure like how we would be changing things. And so concrete examples might help, just comparing like because I know sort of what we had, the system of what we had, but I'm not don't know if I'd be super familiar with what it will sort of look like now after these refactors.
I can't tell why this didn't come to my local repository. That's really weird. Okay.
Ditto, Bryce. I'm there too.
Mako output template. Okay. Okay, that's weird. Normally it shows you the remote branches. Well, whatever.
No, I mean, it doesn't for me. You check out the branch and then you pull.
That might be a special config that you can do to show. That sounds useful, and I would like that, but I don't think it's default.
I always see like a list of like a bunch of obsolete ones, and maybe it's because I've sent it early on anyway. Okay. So this is what it looks like. I think I got the big stuff. I'm gonna have to go through and make sure I didn't miss any blocks that are just less commonly used. but it generated a valid YAML file for me. So this is the new format. Basically, what is this? This is a template file, which generates a text file. It's going to be YAML for us, right? And as you work through the template file, it's in the same order that it will be in the output. So that's a big difference. We had this data source file, the output patterns file, where these are in arbitrary order, and you use the key name to indicate which block you want to use. And then the interview YAML file, which I think is called assemblyline.yaml. It is definitely called assemblyline.yaml, which is what I thought. We have these little blocks that say, like here, let's go to the first one, add includes. So it said, we created a dictionary where we said the name of different variables we wanted to send to process through that block. Then we added it to the interview blocks. We said the name of the key. So this include lines up with a block named include here. And then we had to have a variable named includes that we passed directly to it. So that's here, the data. So I don't really remember why I thought that would be the best way to go. I'm totally responsible for that design.
Well, no, I think this was. I remember we did this before. Like, I don't remember if there was some change in DocAssemble that like made using Mako as a template to generate other things or other text files wasn't there.
Then I definitely didn't know about the option. I think I probably would have gone right to it if I knew it was there.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't remember it was new. Okay, that makes me feel better. It's a new thing.
Yeah. I mostly just remember it coming out, and I remember you making a comment somewhere, either in one of these calls or on an issue that was like, oh yeah, this would be a really good thing for us to do. But it was after we had already started some work on this.
So this is going to look really similar. So here we have, this is very similar. We have to make choices about things like, do we want to hard code some values? I think this is a very safe one to hard code.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then the rest, like where do we want to assign values? But the nice thing about this is this knows the whole interview context, because it's just like any other template file that knows the whole context of the interview. So we can directly reference variables. We don't have to pass a list of the variables we want to use in the template. It will know all of the variables that are available in the interview. And we don't have to worry about the variable names lining up anymore because of that. You can use all of the benefit of Mako. So I was like, oh, do we need to make little defs that control formatting the YAML output? Well, maybe a couple, but I did this whole file without needing that, because it turns out loops are good enough. We usually just use either very simple blocks like a question block. It's like, okay, I don't really need a function that says you have the question heading and then sub-question and a list of fields. I can just copy and paste that very simple syntax. It's going to be easier and clearer to read if it's in place. And then you can use loops for things that are repeated, which is just normal like Mako. So the only downside is when there's a lot of ifs and end ifs, and for and end fors, you just need to trace that logic on your own. We could just use extra spacing in the file to do that. There are Mako comments too.
I was just about to say maybe adding some Mako comments that won't be in the final file and like change the spacing of that, but that would help, because this does look super useful, but I do think that, and it's not super hard to read, but I know I noticed at some points like where I feel like most people are probably more used to reading Mako within a question, and there are a few times where we're putting like for loops around an entire block, which is just not what we're used to reading, and so I think it might be easily missed if someone skimming really quick. So just adding whatever the Mako comments look like, adding a few spaces before or after that might help.
These are what Mako comments look like. So I think this is the only style we can use. There are other styles. I haven't experimented with them to make sure that they won't work. But I think in order to use these, we would need to use some like vertical spacing in there too, right? To make it stand out a little bit better.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, honestly, is just honestly using the comment to put vertical spacing, or even split up, like do a comment and then do the same sort of Python thing we do of just a whole bunch of hashes followed by like question loop, and then the for loop followed by like the start block, etc. for the rest of that.
Yeah. And the one thing I did do is I added in these comments, which are literally inserted into the file, which can help us too. So we had a couple of those. I was like, we should actually probably have a few more. So I added one for questions. But then you still have to be able to track, well, where is the if and end if and for and end for potentially?
Yeah, that's what I meant. The line on 139 is the thing that I think would be easily skimmed over. Or at least I feel like I would easily skim over that because I'm not used to a for being in that part of a code block or a question block.
Okay. And any thoughts like, yeah, is that too verbose? Or, I mean, it's a little bit busy, right? But I think if you have the vertical space, it might help find it. The %doc, I'm just saying, seems a little busy.
That's
Is it
fair.
possible to do that in one line?
I don't
Like
think
both
so.
started and end it?
I don't think so.
Okay, so it's not like HTML that way.
Well, okay, so it said that you can use, I think, like 2 hashtags in a row as a comment. It's like, that doesn't seem right because this is literally being interpreted as a markdown file. So I don't think we can use that syntax there. I think it's going to be grabbed by the markdown interpreter. So that's the one-line comment version. So I think this one seemed to not be put into the output.
Okay.
But it is busier, like I said. But I think it's one that it's not going to be interpreted incorrectly as markdown.
Okay.
I'm okay with that, yeah.
Yeah, there might be some other options. We definitely can experiment with it. Okay, so basically, yeah, it sounds like people are on board with this change. I do expect there'll be bugs introduced by it, so I have to think about that and how to check against them. So, like, the one thing I'm doing right now is
We can add JSON tests.
JSON tests.
Like
You mean?
Sorry, go ahead,
tests
Michelle.
that match, like kiln tests that match specific JSON, as long as the variable isn't nested as an attribute of an object.
It made me think like the whole Weaver should be unit testable. And the big reason is we don't have a Python API for the Weaver. This will help us work towards that too.
Nice.
But so yeah, I mean, I do think there's some readability changes that I'm making now that I guess I could just undo those and say we're going to wait to do that change till later, because that makes it so we can't do a literal comparison of the file. So yeah, maybe you're right. But we would want to have that in a unit tested format, right? Because we have several different modes for the Weaver right now. And
I agree, unit testing is good. It makes it pretty. I was going to say, so when we switched to using output, is it output format.yaml? Whatever that file name is that the thing we're currently using.
named it .make it. Oh, right. Output patterns.
Output patterns. Thank you. Yeah, when we switched to using output patterns, I know we had a suite of something that we ran through and generally made sure things were okay. And I'm sure we could find that by going to one of the PRs that introduced it. Do we think that would be good enough for making what is essentially very close to some like very similar changes again to the Weaver, or do we think we've added enough we've added more features to the Weaver that could easily be broken by this that aren't tested, that like wouldn't be tested by that suite of whatever we had.
I think the suite that we had was the AL Kiln test, and yeah, it was like an end-to-end test of one path through the Weaver.
It was just that? Okay.
I think that was what we did. I know we talked about a lot of things, and I think ultimately that might be all we did. Do you remember anything else, Michelle?
I don't remember other tests, but I mean, there were some unit tests, but nothing that was like
You have
an
unit tests,
output
just won't
test.
really affect anything that we're unit testing.
Hmm?
We do have some unit tests; those don't go away. But this change will not affect anything that we're unit testing.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And I think I'd be okay with that.
I mean, I'd love to have all the stuff that unit tested, so that's where I think we might be able to get to soon. That's my hope.
If we could, I mean, ideally, if we could write unit tests for the existing content and then make sure those tests keep passing, that would be ideal, but I don't think that's possible the way we have it right now, right?
I think the closest we get is the kiln test. It's not a unit test; it's an end-to-end test, but it's not a unit test because we can't. No API that you can access in Python.
Yeah.
For the interview, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's what we will be able to do with this change, but we really can't do it now. I don't
So
see
you
a way
can't,
to.
yeah,
least.
so we can't test and like, there's nothing to harden the change.
Like how would we unit test that it's doing the right output when there's no way for us to access the output? That's the problem.
Mhm.
But
I mean, I think right now we're doing.
I'm going to try
one-
closing my screen and see if hopefully it doesn't disrupt anything.
Okay. I think the Weaver, I think the Kiln tests are testing output, right? With JSON, they're testing the JSON that's generated. So the string
Okay,
that's generated for the,
Okay. Change my video.
Yeah, we're grabbing the interview string from the JSON, not necessarily the whole JSON. Right.
Okay.
so I mean, we could write tests
back
that
to
would
doing my screen share.
test backward compatibility for that,
So
but
I
in the
think
AL
what we
Kiln,
really
but
probably
that's
the
all
best
I
we
think
can
we
do
can
is just well, I just copied the Mako templates and then just checked the variable names. One nice thing about this is that it will, because we're using the names that are from the interview, that's one change I'm making. It's not literally the same anymore because we used to be passing a list of fields or a dictionary of fields to the template to render. And like I said, sometimes the names didn't line up anymore once we made that change. But we did, I think so. I think it's going to be a combination of like double checking that everything still is right. It's only a list of like 30 or so blocks probably at most. And then having like 5 or 6 paths for manual testing. Don't really see a way to do better than that. But then I will say, like, after that, we can make unit tests for the features we want on the new code.
I mean, once again, can you hear us, Quentin?
So everyone seems to agree this is a good
Can you hear
idea.
us?
It's worth us trying.
Yeah, can you actually hear us? We've been talking.
It'll have value down the line. So I'm happy to keep going with it. With that gut check. Other thoughts? Oh, I can't hear you at all. Okay, I have to change the sound.
Rip.
Okay, so it was going through my Yeti microphone, which I don't have my headphones hooked up to.
Yeah.
I hear you.
So I think one thing we were saying was that we could do these tests that you're saying need manual checks. We could theoretically do them with Kiln because we are currently doing an output test with Kiln, but
Yes.
It depends on what you want to do. Right.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. So I think like what are the new features that haven't been tested in the Kiln test right now? The big one is the save feature, save answers to the database feature that Lily worked on. So that is not available for us to, that's not part of it. There's no Kiln test for that yet.
Yeah, but I was thinking of the output tests. That's what we were naming so that they don't have to be checked manually.
You're saying make a feature in Kiln to compare the output?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that's the part that manually, if it has to be repeated, could be pretty onerous.
So I was going to say, I think the thing is,
The building the tests is, oh, sorry, Bryce.
oh no, sorry. I was going to say, from what my understanding of what we're doing in the manual test, even the one that's checking the output, it's sort of you're just quickly making sure that like the key variables are the same.
Sure.
Is that, and we're because we already sort of stated we can't do a straight string check. Yeah, there's a question for Quinn because I'm just making sure I'm
You're wondering whether we want to check more than just the strings being.
Yeah.
So I mean, I could change the scope of this change so we're expecting literally the same output. I could change that. I think I only made a very few changes. Like I think I added this questions here. Yeah, that could be our goal, to have the output be string, like character for character identical.
Because that would be okay. I was also going to say I'm okay with manual testing for essentially what would be one PR. Because we would have a lot of heavily, which is what I think it's a good habit to do a lot of manual testing before a big refactor, or at least just a lot of testing before a big refactor, manual or automatic. And so as long as it's just for this PR, and then sort of like the next thing we focus on is getting more unit tests in to like individually test things and closer to end-to-end stuff, or I guess more integration, but like integration that you can run in Python and not have to spin up all of DocAssemble for. As long as that's like the next thing we go to, then we're not maintaining this level of manual testing. We're just doing it for one PR, which is, in my opinion, okay. And we can also take the manual tests that we have made and try to turn them into, or try to make them as automatic as we can through more Kiln or through these Python tests.
Also, if we intelligently use diff checkers, I don't know if I can catch all the keys that need to be a certain way without some kind of list. So for me, like a diff checker might be the way to go, but yeah,
that's what I was thinking I would do too. I would just we're doing like 6 to 10 times that we run diff on 2 files. Is that, or you're thinking of automating the diff checking, Michelle, or manually opening the diff tool?
Manually opening in a diff tool. If we're doing manual tests, just Bryce was like, we can check the keys, and I'm like, I mean, you can check the keys.
That's fair. I'm more thinking. I think it. Yes, that's fair. I was more trying to say I think it might be hard to write exactly what we want to check in like a unit test or like in a Kiln test, than opposed to us going through it, and because we'd have to figure out which parts we exactly want to check, and in doing so, we've essentially done a check for one of the paths we need through. So we just manually do it a few more times.
It's the repeated, that the exact like situation where I'd see it being useful is if something doesn't go right and you need to repeatedly do the test, right? So that's the only place in which it would be useful. So if it's all working, then there's no problem. And the manual test isn't,
No, that's fair.
That's a good point.
With a diff checker, I think it'd be easier. So
yeah, I wouldn't want to rely on my eye alone to see if the things are identical. So I guess my goal for this PR will be make the output exactly what we want it to be. I could even put in some comments like these multi-line Mako comments for where I want to insert new stuff, and just leave it commented out for now. So we're going to go for like string identical files. And
And then we can use diff to catch errors. I actually think once we catch one round of errors, we should be able to track them down fairly closely, because even though we're changing where the code is executed, they're going to be just a small number of typos, I think, that are going to cause problems. Yeah, I mean, like I did this all in one go and I pushed it up and said, okay, will it work? And then I had like 5 errors. So I feel like that's pretty good for typing a couple hundred lines, because it was mostly copying and pasting and then changing something that was like a variable named interviews that we had passed in a dictionary to being the top level variable, like interviews, interview dot. So not interviews wasn't the right word. Interviews dot includes, maybe instead of includes, because it was pulling directly from the variables that the interview knows about rather than the variable we were passing in that dictionary. So like, it's actually, I'm not changing very much code. I'm just changing where it's executed right now. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to have to delete some of the redundant blocks like this, which don't really add like a bunch of syntactic sugar around, like just we want to execute the Mako blocks. We don't really need to like call them and instantiate them in this complicated way that we're doing. So my point is, it's going to be typos. There's not like huge changes to the logic that we're making.
That's fair.
One thing I can defer in this PR is like, I want to have like these methods. All right, I'm sorry. Stop my cat from chewing up my new computer. I want these to be Mako blocks rather than Python format strings, because I feel like that will be.
Yeah, that'll be a lot better.
Okay. But maybe I should defer that, because that's a place where we can introduce new errors, because it's not like a Mako template I'm translating. I'm turning a format string into a Mako block, and I might make more mistakes there. But I don't know. What do you think? I mean, in some ways, I think it's going to be much better to just have to do this change in one go. But I take your thoughts there.
I think it depends on if what we want to do for the I think it depends on what we want to do. If or like how we can end up setting it up. If we are okay with like not making any actual changes and we're just doing or any additions or any actual changes to the things, then yeah, that actually makes sense to just sort of try and do it all in one go. And if the the output is the exact same as it was before, then it's good and we don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
But if you try to start doing it and it's just the way we formatted it was too complex to do with Mako stuff, which I can't imagine would happen, but it might be just really wacky. And like but there's like an equivalent way we can still output it. It's just gonna have to look different. Then I think that's probably a push it back to a different PR.
Okay. So yeah, maybe what I'll do is I'll try to push through the changes up until this point, changing any of the defs, and then I'll go through them one at a time and just see, do any of those cause problems, and be ready to go back. I guess I could do another branch off a branch, but probably I don't need to do that complicated either.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so I'll keep working on this then. Let's see. And then I think there might be some other refactors that can get kind of bundled into that a little bit. Let me just see this list of refactors, things that were tagged as refactor. Well, I mean, the API, something potentially, right? Trying to think. So what we would need to do is mock the a couple of variables. Like here's a list of fields, but we could even go to the level of like, the more we do things with the I'm feeling lucky code, the more we could really do unit tests with just invoking the interview generator.py. So that would be like a goal that we don't have to try to do in this round, but it's really helping us move closer to being able to do that, I guess.
I am down for that.
And I guess we could have mocked that whole structure of all those blocks in the, it's a data structure, but yeah, it would have been like so far away from what a user is really doing that it would have been not very good. Okay, and then like that really means like I'm hoping to just push through this because it feels like it's something that we want to do before we get to the really interesting stuff, which is this UX redesign, where I've tagged like 22 issues which seem like they're related to it. Some of them might be nice to link them to Trello cards and say this is where we talked about this feature, but I might just kind of just start working on it. Like I said, the UX audit that I did with Brett, there weren't like any real major findings that I had from it. I think the biggest takeaway that I had was, even though he had done 2 forms with Weaver before, he didn't really see the value of using our labels, or how much, like the idea of going from like having to code 10 variables by hand versus you're going to use the exact same question anyway, or maybe customize it lightly later, versus using one of our field names that gathers things like name and address, wasn't clear. So I wonder, I don't know, that's more like a broader assembly line topic than it is exactly Weaver UX, but that was the biggest takeaway I had. Let me see. I did put a couple of other points here, I think. Oh, the rename fields. I didn't actually give him very good tasks. Probably that's probably part of it too. Oh, this is a big one. Okay, so like he was able, that's a more sophisticated thing. He knew that code was the option he wanted for a lot of fields. He's like, I don't want to actually directly ask the person for something like the name of the address where the court is, because we know the county. We should be able to tell them what court they're in. But then, so we chose that for the field type, but then he had no idea or any concept of what code to put in there. It's like, oh, good point. Maybe, I don't know if so. It does make me wonder how useful that field type is, or if there's more guidance we can give people at that point. I just don't know how to handle that task yet. But that was the only other really complicated thing that I ran into in the usability audit. We might want to do a couple more, but
yeah, I'm trying to think of how to best do the code thing. Sometimes I run into, not necessarily with the Weaver, but just in interviews trying to do code things, and then you almost always have to just fall back to like asking the question anyway, which might be a factor or a something to do with just the e-filing stuff that I do a lot, where like, oh, you don't know if this request went through properly, or like someone set up the server wrong, and so you get an error when you try and get like what courts are available or something like that. But I don't know if it makes, I guess leaning towards code as a thing is useful in that, like, but I don't know if it makes sense to ask in the Weaver, or if we just have like essentially if that makes sense to ask in the Weaver.
I mean, I guess one way would be if we did like the math kind of stuff, right? Like other low code tools, I've seen what they do is, they give you like string concatenation, addition, subtraction, like they give you a little editor that lets you create the code in place. It's like not really what we're trying to do with the Weaver. Sorry, go ahead.
Are we trying to like just decide what the output would be of a code type block? Because I can see something that does a, Here,
I'll show you
I
the
don't know, like a field that it would do, but
Shoot.
Court County. And it would be a block that says code, Court County equals placeholder, the string placeholder. And then get Court County equals true.
I'll show it to you in context because actually that might be good for the conversation. I'm not sure how recently you ran a form through the Weaver where you might have wanted to see that.
It has been a while since I've looked at the code.
Okay. Let's see here. Oh yeah, this was also like, it's like, oh, these are so many screens you have to click through. That didn't phase Brett at all. He's like, he didn't have to read very much of most of the screen, so that was fine. It's like, okay, I guess all the energy we put into thinking about that probably didn't matter that much.
It might for a new developer.
It might depend on the developer for sure. And again, jumping right to the field. So this is like, I think, a weird heading here, but this question was clear enough, which was the most important one. People don't read most of the text on the screen. They jump to the first thing they can interact with.
Yeah.
Okay, so here, if I change the field type to code, I get this prompt here, complete the expression. So one thing that was interesting, I noticed Brett realized that he could put whatever he put here, if it was a placeholder, had to be coded.
I think it might just be better to make a placeholder and not have people. I mean, this looks like it's really going into like form builder territory where it's trying to get a bit too big for what it is meant to be,
So we do have this option here that's called skip this field, where we could turn it into placeholder instead.
Yep.
It would be okay turning code into placeholder, right? Not skip this field into placeholder.
So skip this field.
Skip this field is a different thing, isn't it? Because isn't that just like, oh, there was an extra field in this PDF that I don't actually use?
Well, what I do is it creates a block that assigns it to DA empty. So it actually acts as a placeholder, even though we call it skip this field. It doesn't delete the field from the PDF, and it doesn't delete it from the list of fields that's in the attachment block.
Okay, I see. That would probably be okay, I guess. Placeholder itself seems. If we change the name to something besides placeholder, that would be good, because I like the sentiment, but placeholder itself, makes it feel like, oh, you would have to enter what the placeholder is, right?
Good point. You're right.
But I like the idea. I like the idea of at least just combining code and skip this field into something that's just like, I'll do this later.
So maybe skip this field for now. Skip for now, or
that would be, yeah, I think that would work. Okay. And then pop up a little note if it's selected. That's just like, you'll be able to edit this in your generated interview with and something like that. Like, it'll look like this.
Could do something like edit later.
Yeah. Okay. You can edit this later.
Something like that.
All right.
I like the idea though.
All right. Yeah. So code was something that people definitely wanted. We don't really want them to try to answer it now. And I made this be limited intentionally to being a single line expression. So that really gives you very few options to do much with it. But yeah, I guess it's like, one thing that was interesting, he was like, oh, I want this to just be today. So I'm going to just try typing today, which what it would do is it would work, but it would insert the function with the angle brackets, right? Like the name of the location of that function in memory, because today's a function.
Yeah.
What we wanted was this. But it's like, oh, I wonder if there's a very short list of those placeholders we might just let people put in. Was one other thought. What I'll do is I'll make an issue for that and just say like usability issues around code option maybe. And we can just write down our notes there.
That's fair.
And sign in, I guess. My two-factor. All right, I'm gonna not that it really matters, but I'll possibly share. Okay, so that's really all that I had as far as the takeaways from the usability audit, and then the ideas for the refactor. So I think I have really clear directions there. Thank you. And the other question was about the AL toolbox and some of the open issues there. So if someone wants to open that and walk through like what you did last week. Sorry, I should have probably looked at the video. You don't have to repeat stuff that you did last week, but the things that were questions that you still have open.
Yeah, let me try and get those up. We had, yeah, okay, it's up now. Screen sharing. Okay. So I think we had started from the bottom. We only labeled one question, and so I'm not sure what the question was. Oh, okay, so what is this one? Create a version of yes, no, unknown, suitable for displaying the words yes, no, unknown. And we essentially tried to figure out what the context of like what we wanted to change is, and or yeah, like what the actual change that we wanted to be, or that like we wanted to do. Is it a new function that's just similar? Is it the same function but in a different context? But yeah.
Let's see. Let's scroll up a little bit to see the original thing. That's all it had. There was no comment on there.
Yeah, this is the context you had of just it's useful in checkboxes but wouldn't work on a review screen.
Okay. So I guess for a checkbox, it must output true or false, right?
So it'll no. So what it does is it's I think you had said if it's used for checkboxes, but what it looks like it's for is when you have, I think it was in this question makes it really clear of like when you're using it, of when you have a yes no question right before that, like if you answer yes to, then it pops up an additional question that is then something that you're entering. So essentially, if you say you don't know what your income, or if you don't know your other party's income, you don't have to answer this question, and then this will just show up as blank, I think it was. Yeah, or as the placeholder, which the placeholder getting passed is 0. So so it's like and so I'm not sure, like I think we generally understand that, but we weren't sure if like how it would be related to the new function. If it's just a completely separate thing that is also called yes, that would also spit out yes, no, etc.
This is a little confusing, isn't it? So there's like a yes, no function, right? Is that what it's called? That outputs the word yes or no, depending on whether the value is true or false. Yes, no, unknown feels like it's probably misnamed, because it does something really different than just outputting the words yes, no, or unknown.
That's fair. Okay.
Or maybe unknown was meant to be. Yeah, I felt like I guess that function doesn't have a very clear name, but I do think I understand the context of this. What we want is to have something you can use in a review screen. So it should take a yes, no, maybe variable, which is either true, false, or none. And then
Mhm.
output in the review screen context, a literal string, yes, no, or unknown. That's the new function that we're looking for. This existing function, I feel like
It's just a separate thing entirely.
just a separate thing entirely. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm a little confused by it now, even though I probably wrote it.
That is all good. Okay, I think that makes sense, and that does actually make it a lot clearer of just this is how, like, this is what the new one would be. Okay, cool. That's an easy thing in that case.
Maybe we
I
should
Do you
Yeah,
want to write it in?
close that one and just say like, create a function that displays a yes, no, maybe function value as yes, no, or unknown.
And change the name of the old function? You
No, I
can
don't-
just
I don't
change the
think we can
title
change
of
it.
an issue.
What?
You can just change the title of the issue. You don't have to make a whole new issue.
Well, I don't know like how much, let's look at that again. Let's see. So you obviously added a comment last week.
Yes.
So maybe the context of the other one is actually, yeah. I don't feel
You
like
can't-
bringing in the other existing function is actually helpful for the discrete task of the new function.
Cool. Okay.
Maybe we should call it yes, no, maybe, the new function. Because that's what it's for, that type of field.
But we said yes, no, unknown is misnamed, right?
Yeah, but I don't really know how we can rename it. It's a very specific function used in the 209A. I don't
Amount
think I would
or
use
zero?
that pattern again.
Well, I don't think we're saying we couldn't rename it. I think we're saying the effort of renaming it and then making sure that we don't break anything and roll out is more than the value we get from renaming it. We can add some extra comments here that are like, this is used for this particular case.
We should at least deprecate it and make two separate functions, like another function that does this same job,
Why?
that is properly named.
Well, I don't know if it's a useful job yet. I would say like we could wait till we run into a field form that needs it to go through that.
But then we'll just use this one because it'll be here already. And we
I
won't
think
have to-
deprecating is a good idea. I'm just not sure that we should go through the trouble of making a different version of the function.
Okay.
I don't even know if we need to deprecate it. I guess the name is a little confusing.
So we would we would have to write deprecated. I think that's what Michelle was suggesting. We write deprecated on this function and then make a new function that essentially calls the old function still. And then when we want to, if we ever want to actually remove it, we would just copy the contents of the old function into the newly named one and delete the old one.
Yep.
I think maybe not just the name of the function, but the behavior should be deprecated though. So I don't want to rename it or copy it until I mean, we could probably spend a couple hours looking at it and say, oh, actually, it's brilliant. And here's why we need something which behaves exactly the same way, but it's only used in one function. I don't think a student's going to run into the need for it. Or we wouldn't tell them, go look at the definition of this function and see why it could help you right now. I don't know. I'm a little bit leery of the time it would take to see if the function could be fixed or renamed or whatever. But the new one makes sense. Like we have a yes, no function in review screens. Sometimes people use yes, no, maybe fields. We need an equivalent thing for that just to build review screens.
But do we want it to output yes, no, maybe, or do we want it to output yes, no, unknown?
Well, the field name is yes, no, maybe. But the actual string that DocAssemble displays on screen, I think, is I don't know. Right? Does anyone know?
I think
That's
it's-
the option it gives, I believe.
Yeah, yes, no, I don't know.
So maybe we should call it yes, no, maybe. I feel like we should mirror the field name. People will know I want to use a field name, yes, no, maybe. And the function that matches it. Just like the yes, no function matches it. You might, for that reason, also want to smush the words all together. And just see how it looks with yes, no, maybe without underscores. And then unknown, I guess we want to mirror the answers the person answered on the interview, right? So it really should be I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, so separate things. The output should be yes, no, or I don't know. And then the function name, I think, should be yes, no, maybe. And I would argue for maybe not having space or underscores in the function name, just because then it would mirror the yes, no function and it would mirror the field name.
I see.
It does
Okay.
look kind of ugly, but
I mean, it breaks our naming conventions, but
well.
Not if we think of it as a new thing, a new yes, no, maybe thing, as opposed to yes, no, maybe as individual words. It's that, which is kind of confusing to explain, but
Yeah, because we're mirroring the name of the data type, which is one word.
okay. If we think we're encouraging a good practice, then that's fine.
I think I think it helps clarify how we're using what it's linking it to, which is the data type. So I mean, we obviously don't use underscores every time we use words, so it depends on context. In this context, we're trying to, yeah.
cool. Okay, but yeah, that makes sense and is actually fairly simple then to do.
I guess we could probably look at the function, the just do a search to see if it's used anywhere else, but I just wouldn't necessarily trust that it's going to all be open source interviews. So
yeah, I think that's how I had found it was being used in child support, and I think it was only being used there. It's always hard to tell with GitHub, because yeah, I don't trust GitHub search honestly.
yeah,
It's in several. It's in, so it's in protective order, our documentation, toolbox, MAVC. It was something copied from MAVC essentially.
okay. I mean, part of it is like it was referenced, I think probably early on in our project, I didn't realize you could do multi-line Mako in the attachment block, which to me would be a clearer way to write that. So I just wouldn't use that pattern again, where we're trying to cram all the logic into a function to fit on one line.
That's right.
So we could go back and fix the ones where we know it exists and just say, just don't ever use this function. But yeah, I'd hate to break people's code for like a tiny little 4-liner function, just because we think it's not good. But just putting a comment there that says it's
Into the attachment block line, I think would be
What's that?
just to clarify it.
Well, just anytime you're using it, it would be that the idea is to put it in one line.
Yeah,
In
that's
a
true.
one-liner. In a YAML one-liner then, because
Well, it could be in, I mean, there's any number of places you could use it. I guess it could be in a template, in a Word document template too. Although I think you're right, the most common situation would be the attachment block. But I think Bryce is right that it's
we
not.
wouldn't. I'm just saying how to separate, how to make it more clear that we are not talking about us making a one line in our module, but we wouldn't want someone else to use it just to get things on one line.
I think that's a good change. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think that gets the concept really clearly. Thank you for that clarification too.
Cool.
I mean, it could be, like I said, we could spend an hour on it. I was like, oh no, actually there was a really good reason for it. But my guess is I just didn't really think of a way to do it in multi-line that was readable. Or that I didn't think you could do multi-line. Yeah, I think it's something like that probably. So yeah.
That's fair. Yeah, no, we don't have to go through more, but essentially we have just been going through some of these other ones, trying to see which ones are valid, adding add in labels if we had, or if we needed to. I think this one in particular, we weren't sure of like what this would look like or what these would look like, but
Oh yeah. So as far as I know, when you want to evaluate a checkbox variable, you need to go through each individual option using the val statement. Like it doesn't let you combine the val statement with the name of the top level variable name and then say they're all checked or they're all unchecked. But sometimes in a comparison, sometimes like you want to show or hide a field based on someone checked none of the above or someone checked. Yeah. So you end up having to like go to like really low level JavaScript, I think, to do some things that are really easy to do in Python.
I think the question, I think the question was, this says, for example, to check every checkbox item is empty in a particular, right? Like what other examples are there of ways in which we could enhance the JavaScript?
Other than checkboxes.
Yeah, and it's honestly, I think it's fine if there's nothing and we just start with the checkbox, and if there's enough.
Agreed, yeah.
Yeah, but mostly if there was anything else that we think that we should start with. And if not, and also I think the second thing we weren't sure about is how exactly it gets, like if this would just be a thing we would have to try and demo it upstream, or if, I guess you can, does JavaScript declare it in an interview or like in the included interview, just you can call that in JS show-offs? I'm not sure what the order of all of that happens. Okay.
Right. If you make it available in the interview, I believe you can reference it in the JS show-off.
Okay, cool.
So we would want to maybe change the val function the way it works, or I don't know, have it return an object maybe if it's a checkbox field that you could then do something like any true or all true on, like as an operation. Maybe.
Okay. Yeah,
I think that's just checkboxes and multi-selects, I guess, or I think those are the same thing as checkboxes, basically, as far as the code is concerned, but they might be different, I guess.
As far as the author's code concerned is, yeah. I think the HTML is definitely different, but you're right. You would want to do the same thing with that.
I don't remember if there are other things that where you really want to be able to manipulate the value in code, but I think like generally it either returns a number or a string for most, and then or true or false for most data types. It's just boxes that are weird. I guess files, that was one where there wasn't a really good place to manipulate it. I don't know if that needs to be added to this issue or if it should be a separate issue. File upload types, you might want to do comparisons on.
That's fair. No, okay. I thought we had some.
I've been trying to work on that for the Weaver. Maybe that's what you're thinking of.
That's probably what I'm thinking of, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to be able to tell if there's a PDF uploaded or not, and show if I had different values depending on that. And I don't remember, I didn't finish it. Jonathan had some ideas that I wanted to try. I didn't finish just testing them.
Okay. Okay. I think that makes sense though, and it makes, I don't know if it's how many of these things we would want to try and push upstream versus if they could sit happily in Toolbox, we just leave them in Toolbox. But
yeah,
that's probably, I think that's a thing that is probably decided once we actually get this in Toolbox and get things working stably. So
yeah, I think that sounds right. Like after it's ready, there's no reason to rush it.
Yep. Okay.
Cool. Were those the main two where my issues were confusing?
I think so. I think everything else was either fairly or was either fairly straightforward, or we just needed to, or sort of was like out of both of our depths. I think like the Google Place API was one that we both were like, it was like, yeah, it looks good. We just don't have. Did I comment on it? No, you commented. Yeah, we were just like, yeah, neither of us really know a lot about the Place API to make any progress on it. So
Yeah.
but everything else was, I think, good.
Okay.
We
Oh,
didn't get
look at the standard
them,
language selection
but-
component. Can you click on that?
Yeah.
we didn't get to all of them. So
Yeah, no, we only got to these last 7 or 6.
Okay, we can close this issue because we have a question built into the assembly line now that's meeting the same need, basically.
Do we? Okay, cool.
Basically, what I decided is there's no way to show every language and let people select through it. Like that's not a helpful thing for people. You need to just make a choice and then have another option.
Okay.
And we have a question like that.
I was gonna say, do you remember what it's called?
It's dot language is the attribute it's setting.
Okay.
And yeah, there we go. Not preferred language,
It's probably in this.
but it is in that same file. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look for dot language
There you go. Okay.
and language fields. Yeah, and then there's a list of, I let people put it in their own list.
Okay.
Is that AL language user choices C as a parameter you pass to it. So,
Gotcha. Okay.
so it's customized right now. But yeah, I think that's the goal of that other feature. I think I tried playing around with it when I wanted to like let people say in a language access interview, it could be any language, but I don't think a picker works when you have like 300 possibilities.
Yeah, no, I agree. Too many possibilities doesn't make a ton of sense. And it does make more sense for people to categorize based on like the top 20, 15 languages. I know that's what like Boston does, of like either lets you do the like lets you, or like City of Boston like does a whole bunch of select either for the top 10 languages in the city, or you just write in your own, honestly. So okay.
Yeah, the other thing is like there's different tasks for selecting a language, and I think those are actually talked about on the documentation page pretty well now. Well, maybe not. Maybe there's more that could be added, but sometimes you want to say what language does somebody speak, and in that case, you want all of the language names to be displayed in the user's interface language, right? So if you haven't translated it out of English, you don't want to translate the name of the language into the native tongue of the language that matches it on that screen. But if you have a language picker where someone can choose what language they want the interface to be in, that's where you'd want to use the native language. You can't assume the person who's filling in the interview speaks the language that you want them to pick from. That's what I'm trying to say. If you're saying, what language does this person speak? You can't assume the person who's answering the interview also speaks that language.
Okay. That does make more sense.
Which this is, I see here, like it's talking about translating the languages into the person's language. And it's like, that is sometimes right. But in that case, probably the only time you can really do that safely is when you've translated the whole interview into that language. Because then you know the person is chosen to answer questions in that language that you're displaying the language name in.
That's fair. Okay. Cool.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah, no. Everything else, these other ones still look good. We just haven't kind of quite got to them, and I don't quite think we have the time to get them today either. So.
Okay. Yeah, we run into time. Yeah. Okay. Something to talk about in the future maybe is things like the admonition, Bootstrap cards, things that are Bootstrap features where you can copy HTML to make them work. Do we want to turn those into little bits of code to give an easier API, or do we want to encourage people to just copy the examples from the Bootstrap documentation? So we could maybe we can add that issue. I don't know. It's important to do now or not. But seeing the
Yeah.
admonition issue on there just made me think of this. Like, well, I know I'm not sure if that's the right place to put that task or not.
That's fair. We do have, I guess it's pretty lightweight. I was gonna say we do have a lot of the other functions in the toolbox that spit out HTML. We're also like essentially just copying Bootstrap stuff. So I feel like it makes sense to just also have one for that, and then make it our job to make sure it's working on the latest Bootstrap or whatever.
Yeah, I think it probably is a fair choice for us to make. You're right. Cards are trickier. That's like there's so much customization that I actually do like I've only been using them in one very specific way, so maybe it's not a big deal to standardize it. I really like them for opening screens, and then there I always put an image, and there's things like the number of rows, I guess, that are harder.
Mm-hmm.
You have them go in a container. They're not usually standalone cards.
Yeah, I agree. The cards get complicated.
But yeah, maybe the admonitions are fine. Okay, or alerts. I think they call them in Bootstrap anyway. Okay, all right. Well, I guess we hit everything. But yeah, good meeting, everybody. Anything else anyone wants to bring up or raise for next week's agenda? Next week, actually, I'm not sure if we should meet. Think about this.
We have. When do we? Yeah, I was going to say we should know. Honestly,
So 2 weeks from next week.